Well, good morning. My name is Kay McGowan. I'm with the Digital Impact Alliance, which is a nonprofit initiative based out of the United Nations Foundation. We partner with funders, governments, policymakers, and civil society to find best practices that make sure digital transformation is as inclusive as possible and empowers people, right? It's really based on the rights and aspirations of people. It is my great pleasure to be here today with a very distinguished panel. DIAL, or the Digital Impact Alliance, had the honor of being a knowledge partner to the Ministry of External Affairs and the G20 Secretariat, which of course was led by Mr. Kant. And this is an important anniversary because this year, at the Global Technology Summit was actually the kickoff when India really debuted this idea of digital public infrastructure and put it on the global stage. So it's kind of perfect timing to come full circle back 1 year later and take stock of where we are and where we're going. And to do that this morning, we have a wonderful, wonderful panel that's not only geographically diverse, but also bring a number of key kind of perspectives from the various stakeholders that are really required to make digital public infrastructure work. So we have Stefan Schnorr from the government of Germany, which is very exciting, from the Federal Ministry for Digital and Transportation. We have, of course, the G20 Indian Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, who I think needs almost no introduction here. And then we have Minister Salima, who is leading the IT ministry in Sierra Leone. And of course, we have Shivnath Thukral, who is the head of public policy for Meta in India, but as I've just learned, has a very long and varied career including having founded Carnegie India, or helped to found it. So. All right, we have very little time, so I just want to dive right in. As I mentioned at the top here, it's been quite a year. I think the whole phrase digital public infrastructure was very new last year, and of course the concept was very new. And it's been remarkable watching how the government of India has worked to achieve consensus, not only about the ways in which digital public infrastructure can accelerate development, which is badly, badly needed. As many of you know, of course, we're falling very far behind on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But we've also seen ways that digital public infrastructure can lower barriers to market access. And so there are a lot of implications for competition policy, right? And so not only did the G20 process over the last year really help sort of bring to the forefront some of these great opportunities, but the process also developed a shared framework around digital public infrastructure. So with that, Mr. Kant, I'd love for you to kick us off. You're coming off of a very busy, very productive year. So what's next? I was just saying, I'm surprised you're not on the beach right now.
Well, I'm on my way to Brazil, no? But...
they have beaches.
They have the Amazon.
Yeah, true.
Well, what next? Next is to accelerate the pace of digital public infrastructure, because one of the challenges for us is that if you look at the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of crises. The SDG goals are way behind schedule. Instead of progressing, we've regressed. The post-COVID era has seen vast segments of population go below poverty line. There is 75 countries of the world are facing a debt crisis. There is 1/3 of the world is in recession. Many challenges in the world, but there's one silver lining, and that one silver lining is the emergence of digital public infrastructure. And it's important because the western part of the world has grown on the back of big tech, whether it was Meta or Google or Apple or Amazon, and China has seen growth through Tencent and Alibaba. What some countries have done differently, particularly India, Estonia, Brazil have done, is to create a public interest layer. And on top of that public interest layer, they've done a lot of, allowed private sector to innovate. And therefore, in a country like India, you have PhonePe competing with Google Pay, you have Paytm competing with WhatsApp, and these are open source, open API, open standard, but they are interoperable. And therefore, the private sector keeps innovating on top of it. And this has been possible because India was able to build identity for 1.4 billion people. It was able to, then between 2015 and 17, it opened 550 million bank accounts and seeded these bank accounts with both the digital identity and the mobile number. And therefore, in India, the mobile enables you to do fast payments. We do about 46% of the real-time fast payments in the world. We do 11x more payments than what USA and Europe do. We do 4x of China. And then from fast payment, we have a number of startups like Mobikwik, Pine Lab, etc., who do paperless, cashless lending. And then we have another set of startups like Zeroda, Grow, Upstock, all of them, who use the DPI to do wealth creation. They've taken the stock market to Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, rural areas, and they control about 35% of the wealth creation in India. And then you have another set of startups like GoDigit, Acco, etc., who then provide insurance to the people of India on the mobile, on the go. So when I was taking an insurance policy as a young officer, it used to take me 6 months. They do it in 1 minute to 2 minutes on the go, on the mobile. And they've been able to do this wealth creation, credit, paperless, cashless credit, all this, because India was able to build up the building blocks. Now, these startups are all unicorns. They are all national assets because they were able to do it because India built the identity, India built the bank accounts. Now, that was a lot of hard work, building the identity, building the bank accounts, seeding them with both the identity and the mobile number. And the challenge, as we saw during the COVID, was that while the world was giving out large packages which led to then inflation, India was able to put money straight into the bank accounts of the beneficiaries. 800 million people got money straight into the bank account without any leakages. Not a single paisa worth of leakage, money going straight in. And today in India, we put money straight into the beneficiary account in 700 government schemes with no leakages. And therefore, what India has done is technologically pole vaulted, and that has been the big silver lining, that you've pole vaulted technologically. And now we are linking up AI to the digital public infrastructure. And what it does is that we have 22 national languages, we have about 1,700 other dialects. So if you look at Bhashni and Jugalbandi, it enables AI to be linked up, and anyone sitting in any part of India, any rural person anywhere, can use his local dialect to get knowledge, information, fill up the form in his local language through voice, and get access to any government scheme. And that's the power of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, on the digital public infrastructure. So that's a quantum jump forward in this. Now, what we've achieved through DPI, it's important to understand, is transforming lives of citizens. We've transformed lives of citizens and enabled them to get benefits through digital public infrastructure. And our belief is that in the world today, there are 4 billion people, particularly in the global south. And if the global south, the world has to grow and grow equitably, the global south is important. Global south is important because 4 billion people do not have a digital identity, and 1.3 billion people do not have a bank account, and 133 countries in the world do not have fast payments. And therefore, you need the digital public infrastructure to enable these countries to technologically leapfrog and ensure that we are able to make sustainable development goals reached to them. And that is really the key. SDGs must reach the global south, and therefore you need technological leapfrogging through the digital public infrastructure. There was a vacuum. There was a vacuum in the global architecture of digital public infrastructure. There was no definition. There was no framework. What India's G20 has done is to build that architecture.
Yeah.
We've built the digital public architecture. We've defined DPI. We've built the framework to enable the global south to leapfrog.
Through a consensus process, right? So it's truly a
100%
global
consensus
good.
process. Yeah. It was very difficult, very tough, but we brought every single country on the board to accept both the architecture, the definition, and the framework of the digital public infrastructure. And therefore, now the world will grow on the back of digital public infrastructure.
Yeah, a remarkable achievement, and it's very exciting to think about what happens next. We also have joining us virtually, unfortunately, is Mr. Dilip Asbe, who leads the Unified Payments Infrastructure, which is really the piece of India's DPI that I think has generated all of those remarkable transaction numbers and accelerated the economic formalization of India in ways not really considered possible even a few years ago. Dilip, thank you so much for joining us. I'm wondering, so we've heard all of these great successes in India and how there's now consensus and a shared framework. So now I think comes the really hard work, right, of trying to make DPIs real and work in different contexts for India, or than India and other places. And there are some features which, of course, are going to be similar and shared across regions and countries, but there are some things that have to be contextualized as well. And I'm wondering if you can just give us a little bit of insight into India's journey, with sort of the secret sauce of making UPI so successful and scalable, and then also talk a little bit about the global cooperation on building these sorts of payments layers in other countries, knowing that UPI has become a real model for others.
Thank you so much, Kay. And first of all, my apologies that I could not be there in person due to some exigencies. And, I think, talking right after Mr. Kant is always a difficult job, but let me try to make a justice on that. I think when you look at India and, just supplementing what he said, I think the Indian regulator and the government were very clear on few things what we wanted to achieve, right? So I don't believe that this whole digital payment infrastructure or UPI or any other payment system, direct benefit transfer he spoke about, where we are able to credit 200 million people in overnight, in just a matter of few hours. It's all thought through over the period. And I think the government and the regulator, the financial regulator, RBI, was very clear on few things. One is, the speed of money and formalization of economy is very important. The democratization of the payment system is critical. And when I say democratization of the payment system is, creating a very high speed, low cost, very efficient payment system. And the third thing is the ecosystem led approach. And the ecosystem, when we create the ecosystem looks at the long-term gains and not the short-term and makes the short-term sacrifices. We were fortunate and again, putting up the the first principles that kind of help to build up the UPI or the DBT or those kind of systems what India has built. One is we had good amount of smartphone penetration. We had bank accounts which were powered by Aadhaar. The brilliant architecture, completely interoperable architecture which regulator and the government decided to implement, which had the banks, fintechs, some of the new entities which started like PhonePe, Paytm, Google Pay, WhatsApp, and the when you look at the evolution of the India, right? We tried the context-free layer allowed a lot of innovation. So for example, you can scan the EMI and scan the QR code and give EMI. Today, the initial public offering, more than 60-70% of the IPO applications happens through UPI. So variety of the recurring payments, variety of, we created this evolution, right, which kind of helped to keep the momentum going. And when you now look at the world and how the countries can look at DPI, the knowledge which we have built, I believe that the DPI definition is going to vary for country to country, right? The local context will get added, and I think every country will have to look at. I think the first important is the decision has to be taken. The decision has to be taken that we need a democratization of the payments or any other systems which we spoke about. The country's regulator will have to, the DPI has to be well regulated, right? Otherwise it will not really look at that long term, and it will not gain the trust. The DPI has to look at an ecosystem approach, getting in the diverse set of players to participate into the DPI. And last but not the least is the DPI has to adopt the tech first approach, a kind of innovating and continuous evolution kind of a model, so that it kind of creates that engagement and use cases and the private participation in the system. I believe, Kay, that the connected world, the global financial internet, the finternet is what we call upon, is going to be the reality of the world of the next decade or so. And I think it's very important that for that to happen, most of the countries have a real time, fast, efficient, fast payment system. So I think it's in the world's interest that we kind of, the way India has fast tracked, Brazil has fast tracked. We heard the governor of central bank. I think we need to have this common denominator of the efficient, real time, fast payment digital systems, so that the global financial internet, wherein we don't have to pay 7%, 10% cost for the remittance, we don't have to pay 4%, 5% cost for the cross-border payments. And I think this is a great opportunity for the world to kind of lap up, and I think it's going to be a reality in next 10 years' time.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue actually to Minister Ba, whose country of Sierra Leone, I think, has been such a vocal champion of digital public infrastructure, and in particular of global cooperation around how do countries learn from each other and make things work in their own local contexts. But of course, this is all easier said than done, right? And we often hear India has an economy of scale, they have an incredible technology sector, they had some visionaries who were able to design for the interoperability and to not just focus on reforming public sector delivery, but making sure that the private sector was also able to innovate on top of these public rails. It all sounds great, but again, easier said than done. And I'm just wondering, Minister, if you could talk to us, give us a little bit of a reality check. We were talking in the green room about just levels of connectivity, right? And different contexts, levels of literacy vary from place to place. How do you take kind of the inspiration and adapt it to Sierra Leone?
Thank you so much, Kate. And I think what you said is just right. I think I would start by saying I think our reality check sort of came around when we had Ebola, actually, before COVID pandemic hit. When we had Ebola, I think we recognized how lack of preparedness in terms of essential infrastructure that needed to be built to deliver essential services, payments being one, but even information, accurate health information, how the lack of those systems or infrastructure to do that, how that really impacted our response to the Ebola pandemic and really was a contributing factor, specifically health information, when you don't have that. So I think after that, we really started prioritizing building on these essential infrastructure. That is connectivity. That is the systems and platforms that would ensure that we can deliver services. So I think when COVID came around, I think we're in a much better place because we had invested in these infrastructure, such as connectivity. You know, I think right now in Sierra Leone, we have connectivity in 14 out of 16 districts, which is a massive jump from where we were just a few short years ago. But then I think exactly as you said as well, even though we thought reality hit during Ebola, but then during COVID, we realized there's another layer of reality when you start thinking connectivity is there, which is great, but not as the reality in terms of what kind of connectivity are we talking about, in terms of meaningful connectivity to be able to sustain more advanced platforms. You realize, okay, maybe you don't have those, so when you build, you have to take that into reality. We recognize that other realities also exist, such as literacy levels. And I think when we say literacy, people assume you're talking about digital literacy, but sometimes you're just talking about just literacy. So you have to think of your solutions have to be built with different contexts. So when it came to delivering essential information, health information, we had to think of utilizing different platforms, such as we had to utilize IVR because we understood that not everybody could read and we needed them to get access to the information. But when we think of IVR, then we had to think of, well, we have over 18 different languages in Sierra Leone. So we had to make sure that the information was translated into those different platforms. We used USSD because we understood that not everybody had access to a feature phone. So maybe using chat box or some of these other high-tech platforms wouldn't work, understanding what your realities are. So those are some of the challenges and contextual. That's why I really like that word, because I do think it is contextual based off what your infrastructure, existing infrastructure is and where you're trying to go. But then after that, then we're talking about some of the other challenges you face is issues of integration. Because when we built our own open G2P platform in order to give able to pay citizens, get access to financing, we recognized there were issues around, in terms of the initial ideation when you're building. I think it's really important to think about integration at the start, and I think maybe those are some of the challenges which we faced, because when we built the platform, it wasn't really thought of initially, how do we integrate it with our digital identity database, which I think for now we have over 90% of our citizens on it. So that came later on, which made the process more difficult. At that point, starting to think of integration is something which we had to think through and figure out. But then after that, we also have to think of integration within our banking infrastructure that we had, which was, again, another difficult and painful process to have to go to. And then there's other things such as capacity. Capacity in country in terms of being able to build and sustain this system, but also capacity on the people who are meant to be using it and how effectively can they do it. And then there were issues around policies. We had to address how our financial legal architecture worked, and sometimes realizing even the way those were written, created certain difficulties for us. So those are other kind of issues that we had to address, some of the challenges that we had to come through. So in terms of speaking to countries who are wanting to go through this process, I think is really important at the start to start highlighting some of these challenges, which we really should think of at the initial process.
Well, and as I mentioned at the beginning, Sierra Leone has really been a champion of global cooperation, right? Which I think is probably the only way we're going to see some of these challenges overcome, right? Because you don't need every country to run into the same walls and, start from scratch. So, thank you. Well, Shivnath, you are the lone voice of the private sector on this panel packed with public servants. So maybe, one of the questions that I heard constantly throughout the year, but especially at the beginning of the G20 process a year ago, was a little bit of skepticism over the word public in digital public infrastructure, and people wondering what role market players like Meta and other private technology companies play. Should they be threatened? Do they contribute? We know that some incumbents have probably been disrupted or will be disrupted, but there's also room for innovation. I'm wondering if you can take us a little bit through the experience that Meta has had here, both as a private technology company, but also, interestingly, as a US company operating in India amid this digital public infrastructure.
Sure. Thanks, Kay, and good to be here on a Carnegie panel. Especially honored to be around with so many renowned policymakers, including Mr. Kant, who have kind of seen his work for several years. And I'll leave what the resistance from countries was to Mr. Amitabh Kant, but I can tell you as a company, and Dilip can vouch for it, we've been on DPI for more than 5 years now. So as a company, obviously, the fact that we endorse the use of UPI and WhatsApp Pay and the various applications that Mr. Kant talked about, which I will refer to in just a second. So I think if you talk about skepticism, does it exist? Maybe yes, outside the borders of India. The diplomatic ones I'll let Mr. Kant deal with. The commercial ones we deal with by showcasing the success of what we have seen in India. That's one part of it. So maybe the lack of awareness, and I think our Prime Minister and Mr. Kant have thrown this challenge to people. Anybody who's not from India, please leave your wallet behind, carry your phone with UPI linked on it, and go travel in the country. You will not need cash, you will not need credit cards, you will not need debit cards, and you can buy a cup of tea to an iPhone using UPI. So thanks to Dilip and his fascinating team, what they have done. So whether we bought into it, the answer is yes, very, very long ago, and we have successfully experimented on it on various fronts. I'll come to that. If you look at the opportunity set that Mr. Kant talked about, as a company, I think it's hugely exciting. We are just about scratching the surface of what is the possibility, and we are not even talking going global. I'm just talking India. Mr. Kant knows that he is good at stats, but if you just look at the simple calculation, India is creating a billion digital footprints every day. Now, what does it mean for industry? That's all rich source of information which they then use to understand how the market dynamics works in the financial sector, especially given the success of UPI. Where Meta stands, we see ourselves as the enabler. I will never become a financial services company, but I will always be that digital rail which allows financial services companies to travel on it. So if I have a digital footprint of 500 million users at my end on WhatsApp, I can make sure that I can be the ecosystem partner which Dilip touched upon, that we have to believe one of the pieces that Minister, I think countries should focus on is how to build that ecosystem of partnership, of open communication. I think you see Dilip on a link right now, but we talk to him every day. Every regulator in this country, everybody who's behind the power of DPI, engages with the private sector. It is not like private sector, please stay out. We will make the policies and we will hand it down to you. I think it's been a massively collaborative approach. And just the showcasing of the examples of why companies like ours believe in it. If anybody rides on Delhi Metro, this room doesn't look like they ride on Delhi Metro, but if you ride on Delhi Metro, you don't need to stand in lines anymore. You don't need to go to vending machines. You don't need to figure out how to buy a ticket. You can do it on WhatsApp. It's one of the applications. There could be many more. Why it is successful, according to us, is because of the interoperability of UPI. today you do not need to be in WhatsApp using one of its applications to buy a commercial, enter into a commercial transaction, but only use WhatsApp Pay. You can use any of the UPI pays that has been. So the long and short of it, Kay, according to us is, we like to say the cliche is that you ain't seen nothing yet. I think we are in that phase, even in India. I mean, the underserved segments in insurance, health insurance, pension, the kind of delivery of service that can happen on the DPI layer, and if you marry the power of technology, which I think Meta brings. And one last thing I will talk about, the use of AI. I don't know if Tanuj is in the room from Bangalore. He was showcasing application. If you power the applications within WhatsApp using AI, all the eKYC, which is already happening in an instant, many more such opportunities can open. So I think the private sector opportunity is going to be so massive that any company in the West, if you are not seeing it, then you're really missing a big party.
Well, and that private sector role feels so critical to addressing the problem that you mentioned, Minister, about how do you meet people where they are with technologies that they're already using and are designed well and can overcome literacy challenges. So it's exciting to hear all of the innovation and that you think there's going to be so much more in the future.
Just if I can add one point to Minister, your point, technology is also a good tool to overcome that limitation. Voice notes today, it doesn't require you to know anything. All you need to know is how to speak. And voice notes, as Mr. Kant said, using AI, you can translate what the instruction is and get into a transaction. So, I mean, yes, literacy can be overcome challenges, but I think technology has a solution for it.
Yeah, with the cooperation with the private sector, right? Okay. Stefan, so that's a perfect segue to talking about fora for bilateral relationships, multilateral relationships, one that has been increasingly important over the last year towards discussing and coming to consensus around the opportunity for DPI to accelerate inclusion, promote competition in markets, has been the EU-India Trade and Technology Council. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the ways that that forum and other multilateral fora are able to promote the global cooperation that's really needed now to identify common standards and to find a way to think about governing these systems, which we're talking about, you know, DPI as national technology kind of stacks. But in fact, so much of the technology is transnational, and we see more data flowing into the cloud. AI is going to just accelerate this. How do these policy forums help advance that from your perspective?
Digitization is global, and we discussed yesterday the artificial intelligence and the next steps in AI, and we all agree that we need the international cooperation in this field. And the same is true for DPI. I think the progress that India has made in this field in the past is indeed enormous in the digitization of public services. And the unified payment interface is one prime example, but it's only one example of wonderful solutions that India has worked out in the past. And indeed, and we heard it from the G20 Sherpa, it's a great progress, and I think it marks a very relevant stone that now we have established this common framework for DPI within the G20. And this is indeed extremely important that we, within the G20, work together on standards, on norms for DPI, that we have the interoperability. And the European Union, Germany are partners within the G20 framework. And we have developed, under the presidency of India, we have developed, let me say, the first steps for building up this common framework. And now we have to fill this framework with life. And I'm here in India not only for the GTS, but also for the annual meeting of our digital dialogue between Germany and India that we have since a lot of years. And within this dialogue, we also address concrete problems that we have in our industries in Germany, in India, and we work out common solutions. And this works very, very good since a lot of years. And I think that in the field of DPI, this could also be a good example to bring now concrete solutions on the table and to have a look where can we cooperate. And I think if we have a cooperation within the TC with the European Union and India, we have, for example, in EU also a TTC with US. So I think we can share best practices and we can define common solutions in this field, and therefore I think the addressing within the G20 is very relevant to find common solutions. And at the end, it makes no sense if every country develops his own solution. We need one solution for all, and therefore we need open standards, we need open source, we need interoperability. I think we all saw in the past when COVID came and we want to travel in other parts of the world, we need a certificate for vaccination. And at the beginning, it was not so easy to show our certificate in other countries. But then more and more, we have the interoperability of our apps, and it was no problem to scan the QR code of the European certificate in other countries. So we see that we need this DPI infrastructure, not only on national, but indeed on international level.
Right, in an increasingly global world, right? Well, I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. I'm told that there are 4 microphones around. Oh, great. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Check. Hello. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine.
Yeah. So thank you. Yesterday I asked a question around. By the way, let me introduce myself. I'm Shreyans from FinSire. I run a small fintech company based in Chennai. And we build specifically on top of DPI. I came back from the US, a few years ago. I met Amitabh you in the Indian Embassy in New York. We discussed a lot about that. I've met Dilip a few times before, and what we specifically do is a lot to do with asset classes that are there present in the AA framework, right? So the question specifically is, just as how you made the UPI interoperable to begin with, right? That delivers cross borders. How do you make, and a lot of points were prevalent here, how do you make the whole DPI framework, the layer 1, 2, and 3, eventually interoperable? Some of it was discussed and was mentioned, the fact that, hey, we need a single sort of a global framework. So who takes it forward? Would it be the regulators, the public orgs, private players like us? In some ways or sense, I do see a combination of all 3 to working together.
Dilip, why don't we let you have a stab at that one, since I know that you live with a lot of standards and a lot of regulation.
Yeah, so from a payment standpoint, NPCI has already started a lot of work on that, and we are in touch with about 50 plus regulators, about 50 plus countries. We have also started our subsidiary, which is NPCI International, which is kind of talking to the regulators worldwide, allowing them access of UPI, source code, and those kind of things. So I think the work has been started. The countries will have their own solution providers, their own kind of ecosystem to kind of work on this. So I think some work has been started. I think, as Mr. Kant said, the DPI definition and the adoption by a variety of countries will also open up the dialogue between the government to government and the regulators to regulator. And I think it will all the kind of routes will work in parallel.
Terrific. Do we have time for one more question? No? Oh, sorry. All right. Well, please, we've heard a lot of very important points today. I think what really struck me the most was the repetition of the phrase democratization, whether it's democratization of finance. It all really comes down to democratization of opportunity, right? Which I think is really exciting and is probably what binds us together in this DPI journey. We've got a ways to go, but the last year has been a remarkable, remarkable step forward. So thank you to the panelists. This is great. Thank you for your time and your perspectives.